Today, I am going to be showing you how I painted a basic tree from start to finish. Painting trees can involve different techniques because obviously there's a huge variety of them, as well as the different types of backgrounds, weather, and degrees of sunlight that could greatly impact the way you paint them. And so in this video, I made a tutorial on how I painted a summertime deciduous tree. If you guys are new here, my name is Andre, and I help artists like yourself get better at a faster pace, so that you can save time on your next project. At first, when you think about painting a tree, especially something as simple as this one, it's easy to think that you could rush right through it and move on to the rest of the painting. But when you try to rush the process, your painting is going to turn out mediocre. It's extremely important to take your time when you're painting a tree, because the way you paint the small things is going to greatly impact the way you paint the bigger things as well. Now, without further ado, let's get started. I pre-painted the canvas with a simple background to get an idea of the location. Acrylic paint dries much faster than oils, and so I can actually do this painting in one sitting, whereas with oils it will take a few rounds as you will have to wait for some layers to dry. I start painting the trunk of the tree, then gradually move my way upwards towards the branches. When you're painting the branches going out in different directions, make sure that the thickness of them gradually decreases. Using a thinner brush helps, but also keeping it wet and lightly touching the canvas will help get those thinner parts of the tree. Take your time doing this because the paint needs to be applied smoothly and accurately so you can have a solid tree on which you will be applying the rest of the painting. You have a larger margin of error with the bottom of the tree, as you could go back and correct the size of the branches in the trunk. But when you start working your way outward, you need to start being more careful with your precision. It's important to pay attention to detail here when you're painting this part, because even though the leaves are going to overlap much of these branches, the small details in the painting are going to add up over time. Also, you can leave some of the smaller branches and twigs left unfinished at this point if you want, and come back at a later time to finish them. The branches are going to twist and turn through each other, so paint them going in different and random directions so that it can look more natural. Okay. Now that this first part is done, let's start painting some leaves. This first layer of paint is going to be the darkest because these leaves are going to consist of the ones in the back of the tree away from the sunlight. The color of paint that I'm using is a mixture of sap green along with a very small amount of black. So in this part, I am switching over to a fan brush. I highly recommend this type of brush here as it will help expedite the process of getting the paint distributed everywhere. The way I spread the paint across here is going to be in a horizontal fashion. Try to keep the brushing horizontal and gently apply the paint across the canvas. When the paint mixture on the brush becomes less thick, you can be a little bit more assertive with the painting, but then it's also time to reapply more paint on the brush. You'll find yourself using a lot of paint in this part, so be generous with the amount that you use. Another important part to remember is that not all areas of the leaves are going to be equal. What I mean is that there are going to be many openings left in these areas where you can still see the blue sky in the back. So keep in mind leaving some gaps here and there. Make sure that you do this to maximize your results if you're going for realism. Okay, now that we are done with the first layer, let's move on to the next one where the green color will be slightly lighter. Don't make the color here too bright because this next layer is not going to be the final one, although it can seem like it. These leaves are intended to be the ones in the middle of the tree, where they aren't completely obscured by the shadows, yet not the ones totally out by the sunlight. With this layer, I'm using the sap green again, mixed in with some yellow. I am using the same technique as last time with the fan brush, applying horizontal brush strokes. With this layer, you're not going to cover up all the previous layer. Leave some of the darker parts alone, because you can still see some parts of the tree where there are darker shadows. Okay, so now at this point, I re-evaluated the way the branches look. I'm going back to add more detail to the smaller branches and twigs using a smaller and finer brush. Make sure that you do this to maximize your results if you want to go for realism. Okay, now that I finished this layer, I noticed that there are some parts of the tree that feel kind of empty and not thick enough. Let's go back to the dark green paint and apply a few more clusters of leaves to add some more density to the foliage inside the tree. Now on to the final layer. Here you have the freedom to brighten up the green. We'll be using a mixture of sap green, yellow, and a small amount of white. Same as last time, use the fan brush with the horizontal brushing. However, this time you need to be more deliberate with applying the paint. As you are trying to simulate the leaves, try to place most of this color over the areas that are already lightened up with the previous layer. Now you can start seeing where the source of sunlight is coming from. Also, remember that you could always go back to correct any mistakes. Don't put too much pressure on yourself when you're painting this, because with painting things in nature, the way you apply the paint is much more forgiving than if you would be painting something more structured, such as a portrait or a building. Now, let's stop for a moment and see what we have created here. From an objective standpoint, we have a tree, but to me, I feel like this tree is not finished. All the layers are there. We can see that the leaves have depth, but to me, it doesn't seem like it has the wholeness to it that I see in photographs. This is the part where many artists would stop and feel satisfied with their painting. However, I am not. Let's dive deeper into this painting and let me show you what's going on. The problem I have here is that there is not enough separation inside the leaves where they are the brightest. There's not much shadow inside these clusters, and in real life you'll have small amounts of shadow everywhere, including the parts with the highest color value. The remedy for this is so simple. Let's go back to the mixture we first used, the sap green with a small amount of black. We're going to use the fan brush again, and this time reapplying this color over all the brightly lit areas. Now this part is very important. Do not cover up the entire cluster of leaves. Apply the paint very gently so that you will have these tiny gaps of color where you can still see a few small parts of the bright colors underneath. Do this until you spread out the paint all over the tree. Now, let's move on to the final layer. This part involves going back to the small fine brush, where I will be more methodical and careful with applying the paint. Let's go back to the bright green mixture, the same one we used last time with the bright layer, which was a combination of sap green, yellow, and a small amount of white. Now using this brush, very gently start painting the leaves over the previous layer where you applied the darkening technique. Once again, try using horizontal brushing, but this time keep the brush strokes short and small. This will take up more time than with the other layers, but getting more precise with the final parts is extremely important. Okay, let's see what we have here. Notice how in this version of the tree you have more solid looking foliage, where you can see more separation with the leaves and shadows. The sunlight on the leaves is more pronounced, and the tree looks more robust and thicker in general. The previous version of the tree still has good principles, but if you want a richer, more robust tree, you can't go wrong with taking the extra time and going back to reapply the last techniques that I've shown you. The principles for painting a tree can be applied to painting other objects in nature as well, but some of them are going to vary greatly depending on the sunlight's angle, atmosphere, background, and the time of day. I hope this tutorial has given you some value for your next painting endeavor, and if it did, please hit the like button, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing to my channel so that you can stay updated on more tutorials like this. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.